Welcome, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Living Ethics online seminar series. This is the Living Ethics International Network's third panel in its second annual series, and I'm very grateful for you being able to join the dialogue today. Next slide, please, Story. My name is Manisha, and I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Physical and Occupational Therapy at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. I'm also a member of the Living Ethics International Network. Next slide, please. The 2025-2026 Living Ethics Online Seminar Series aims to stimulate dialogue about the theoretical dimensions of living ethics and the possibilities for living ethics in research and practice. The series has come together through the contributions of many individuals and institutions located in Canada and globally, to whom the series is grateful for their time and efforts. Next slide, please. Today's panel is a book launch and overview of the edited volume entitled Living Ethics in Theory and Practice. It's an honor to launch this book with our panelists, Dr. Eric Racine, Gabriel Saso-Baudaux, and Dr. Giulia Inguaggiato. Next slide, please. So very humbly, I will attempt to introduce today's panelists, beginning with Dr. Eric Racine, who is a research professor at the Montreal Clinical Research Institute, known as the IRCM, and the director and the University of Montreal, and also a member of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Dr. Racine directs the IRCM's Pragmatic Health Ethics Research Unit and is the director of Racine, the research network on citizen knowledge and co-creative approaches of the Fonds de Recherche de Québec. He is also a visiting professor at McGill University and director of the Living Ethics International Network. Dr. Racine is recognized for his contributions to the development of neuroethics and pragmatic ethics. He is the author of 250 scientific publications and numerous books, most recently including The Theory of Deliberative Wisdom, or sorry, not most recently, but including The Theory of Deliberative Wisdom, published by MIT Press in 2025. Dr. Racine's research aims to highlight the morally problematic situations experienced by patients and stakeholders, and then to resolve them collaboratively through participatory and co-creative processes. Dr. Giulia Inguaggiato is an assistant professor in the Department of Ethics, Law, and Medical Humanities at Amsterdam UMC. She has a background in philosophy and bioethics with the primary research interest in ethics support and ethics education. Gabriel Saso-Baudaux is a PhD student in practical philosophy at the University of Sherbrooke in Montreal, Canada. His research looks at the norms of scientific advice to governments. Gabriel is interested in political, social, and virtue epistemology, as well as the philosophy of social sciences and expertise. Without further ado, I'm pleased to pass the mic to Gabriel, who will begin today's panel by speaking about the first section of Living Ethics in Theory and
Yeah, thank you, Manisha. So I'll be introducing the first section, which at its core starts from the shared conviction that ethics is not only a set of rules, principles, or academic discussions. Ethics is something we live, it is collective, evolving, and deeply connected to who we are, our character, our moral development, and the social and professional context in which we act. The first chapter by Suzanne Metteler brings us back to the idea of ethics as a way of life. Medical ethics used to be embedded in good professional practice, but in the second half of the 20th century, bioethics expanded into a separate, interdisciplinary, and theoretical field of scholarship. The result has been a growing disconnect between it and everyday medical practice. And Suzanne pleads for bioethics to reconnect to the everyday in a parallel way to how philosophy, which has also increasingly become a theoretical academic enterprise, was once a way of life, a practical commitment to a particular ideal of existence. And practically speaking, this means that bioethics should shift focus on the moral life of healthcare professionals to provide them with guidance and on dialogical and participatory approaches. Then in the second chapter, Arthur Filel and Eric Racine ask, is living ethics also a learning ethics? They say yes, moral problems evolve as people's self-understandings, that is their identity, values, and beliefs, and their social and technical circumstances change. And these changes raise ethical questions, but they are also opportunities to learn. And this type of ethical learning requires 6 commitments: genuinely questioning one's beliefs and habits, acknowledging the fallibility of moral ideas, listening to and considering others' voices, being open to being changed by others, imagining different solutions to moral problems, and embracing testing, experimentation, and ongoing learning. And in this way, ethics is not something we master once and for all, but something we keep learning throughout our lives. Then in the next chapter, Giulia, which is together here with us, brings living ethics into professional context, particularly healthcare and research. She notes that daring ethics is often taught and applied as a set of principles or codes of rules that demand compliance. But in and of themselves, these do not provide professionals with the necessary tools for their everyday ethical reasoning. The skills needed for such reasoning are developed in practice and everyday experience, where ethical issues evolve, are messy, and more complex than principles can account for. And so, drawing from pragmatist philosophy, she argues in response for a living professional ethics, which is dynamic, situated, and oriented toward everyday practice and problem solving. She introduces moral case deliberation as a concrete method of structured dialogue and on moral problems that succeeds in empowering professionals to recognize the moral doubts they experience and to reason about them. Then, in their contribution, Manisha Pahwa, Julien Derry, Anne Hudon, and Matthew Hunt focus on the capacities needed to sustain a living ethics approach. Ethical capacities, that is, the ability and disposition to think and act in ways that are consistent with the normative ideals of here living ethics, are in practice shaped by specific context. They look at Margaret Walker's concepts of moral habitability, where moral spaces exist in institutions that promote ethical and moral engagement and discourse. For inspiration for their case study, that is Levier, a living lab in a rehabilitation hospital in Quebec, which seeks to create such spaces of moral habitability. And daring, they show that individuals, teams, and institutions can actively cultivate the 7 ethical capabilities they identify as important for fostering living ethics. That is attentiveness, creativity, openness, responsiveness, epistemic humility, reflexivity, and dialogical capacity. And then this emphasis on epistemic humility is further developed in the chapter by Manisha Pahwa and myself. In it, we describe epistemic humility as a social disposition, an awareness of the limits of one's own knowledge, and the recognition, acknowledgement, and appreciation for the epistemic strength of others. Epistemic humility can be cultivated by individuals and groups alike through practices such as reflexivity, dialogue, sharing, and empathy. And together, these practices help researchers identify unhelpful ways of thinking and promote more inclusive and responsive approaches to moral problem. And finally, Sebastian Sattler and Manisha Pahwa challenge the idea that living ethics must rely only on qualitative research. They argue that quantitative and mixed methods can play a crucial role in studying moral situation at scale. For instance, quantitative surveys can be used to explore accounts of human flourishing in diverse societies. And in some cases, the anonymity they offer can even protect participants and encourage more honest expression. And they highlight participatory mixed method research as a promising way to integrate different kinds of data within a living ethics framework. And so taking together, the chapters in the first section show that living ethics is not an abstract ideal. It is a practical, learnable, and collective way of engaging with moral life, one that remains grounded in everyday practice while remaining open to reflection, dialogue, and change. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Julia, it would be wonderful to hear you speak about the second section of the book.
Thank you, Manisha. I hope you can all hear me well. If not, give me a shout. So I'm very happy to introduce the second section of this book, which is a very exciting section where authors actually reflect on how living ethics theories can be embodied and can be embedded into practice. So the authors all start from their own experience, their own personal experience, and reflect on their own personal context. And bring very rich examples of how living ethics can be applied. And these examples come from different geographical contexts and also cover different fields, so ranging from health to policy making. So it's quite a broad range of different contexts that are actually addressed. I'm going to now read just the titles of the chapter, and then I'm going to give you my personal reflections on what I think are the three main key points that all these chapters reflect on. So chapter number 8 reflects on using a living ethics approach within the context of healthcare, and particularly to navigate deep disagreement in polarized healthcare environments. Chapter number 8 goes to a different context, still in the context of healthcare, and discusses a living ethics stance for substance use in neuroethics research. Then we move to a more theoretical chapter in which we discuss what is the role of the ethicist within living ethics. And it's discussed that the ethicist is an architect of dialogical spaces. Then we move towards reflecting on living ethics for policy making. Then in chapter 12, we talk about collaborative research in palliative care. Then in chapter 13, we discuss living ethics in autism research and practice. And finally, in chapter 14, we talk about living ethics of aging. So I think these are very diverse chapters in a way, in the sense that they talk about different experiences and different examples of how the living ethics stands. So all the theoretical background that is explained in section number 1 can live in practice. So the first point, which I think these chapters have in common, is that they all talk about valuing stakeholder voices. So honoring the commitment to participation and genuinely recognizing the importance of the lived experience of all stakeholders, which is one of the pillars of the living ethics stance, involves identifying what are the needs of those stakeholders. So if we want to involve them, we need to understand what are their needs and also understand what matters to them, and ensuring that those needs are addressed so that participation is possible and that it becomes meaningful rather than just symbolic. And this process also calls for letting go of presuppositions, practicing epistemic humility, and cultivating curiosity. The second point, which I think all these chapters raise, is that in order to practice living ethics, we need to create safe conversational spaces. And these chapters, in one way or another, reflect on how do we do that. And they say that embodying a living ethics stance requires intentionally shaping these environments, intentionally shaping these spaces where open dialogue can occur. And this includes clarifying what are the preconditions that make these spaces possible, what are the boundaries, but also what are the commitments that we need to stay truthful to if we want to make the existence of these spaces possible. And the third element, which I think all these chapters touch upon, is that in order to embody living ethics, we need to constantly engaging in iterative processes of reflection. So, embracing this with these iterative self-reflective processes means continuously examining the obstacles that hinder the adoption of a living ethics approach, and being open to reshape constantly practices time and again in light of the lessons that we learn from these and from the context in which we find ourselves. And this reflection helps identifying barriers, whether they are structural, cultural, relational, and then supports ongoing refinement of living ethics practice. So I think overall, these are the three messages that these chapters have in common, and I find this part of this book very interesting because it really links the theory with the practice and also with the personal experience of the authors. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Giulia. Eric, I will turn to you for the third section of the book.
Yes, third and final section. And Giulia and Gabriel did such good job selling the other sections. It's going to be hard for me to attract your attention to this third section, perhaps. But I think I'm in good hands because I think we also have wonderful contributions in that third section, which is dedicated to thinking about the future of ethics and living ethics and imagining where we need to go next. So there's kind of a shift from the first section focused on theory and the second section focused on practice to a focus on imagining some of the broader implications and ramifications of living ethics and things like research context, global research context, political institutions, and also the broader social impact of living ethics. There are 4 chapters, if we exclude the conclusion, in this section, and I'll just kind of give you a little summary of each of them, and I'll pick up Giulia's challenge of trying to identify what's common in those chapters at the end. So chapter 15 is imagine a living research ethics. Imagine a living research ethics. And the authors are Katja Kuhlmeier from Germany and Ariel Casio from the US. And they collaborated on this chapter to provide a critique of the traditional model of research ethics, which is often highly regulatory, bureaucratic. That relates a bit to Giulia's chapter also in section 1. And that model of research ethics is highly focused on compliance rather than genuine ethical engagement. And so they argue that this model actually limits ethical reflection, reduces trust, and imposes norms that sometimes actually don't fit the research projects and the collaborations. They can even undermine researchers' responsibilities and sense of, owning something about ethics, or that this relates to them directly. So they propose a living research ethics, which really is embedded in dialogue, co-learning, ongoing reflection among researchers and stakeholders. So it's a really refreshing take on research ethics, and that I think kind of influences a bit research ethics to make it potentially something else, which is more focused on the involvement of researchers. Chapter 16 is titled Living Ethics in an International Context, and this is written by Abdou Simon Senghor and I. Abdou is from Senegal. He's currently a researcher in France and trained as a postdoc in my team. And this chapter tries to address global health ethics and highlight tensions between, on the one hand, international ethical standards and local cultural values. And we try to show that global ethics is often dominated by Western perspectives. Even bioethics itself can be seen as a Western creation to some extent. And the fact that we don't acknowledge this can lead to misunderstandings or injustice in different contexts. We take different examples, we examine this and try to show that that has been the case, unfortunately. We propose a dialogical post-colonial approach where ethics is co-developed through mutual learning and respect for local knowledge. And we discuss some cases and situations where this did not really occur, and other situations where this occurred more clearly. And our proposal is that there's no single ethical universal framework, and that anything that looks like building a general perspective needs to be based on ethical understanding that requires dialogue and sharing of experience and expertise. So something we build rather than something we impose. So that, I think, tries to speak to the other chapters in the book that address epistemic humility. Chapter 17, Making Ethics Live in Difficult Political Times, is written again by myself and Arthur Fiel who's a doctoral student working under my supervision. And in this chapter, we take a very kind of a high-level sweeping view of the connections between ethics and politics. And we try to show that there's a kind of alignment between ethics, democracy, a commitment to ongoing education, opening education and dialogue, and freedom. And we analyze or take different episodes of world history, mostly Western history, because that's our joint background from Europe and North America. And we show that ethics has lived when these things align more. And we also analyze how current conditions of polarization, misinformation, and restrictions on dialogue are a threat to ethics, to genuine ethics and a living ethics. So in this sense, we try to argue that living ethics is not only a philosophical sense, but also a political and social project. That if really we want ethical dialogue to live, this requires commitments to democracy, education, and freedom of experimentation with different life models, basically. And finally, we have chapter 18, titled From Concepts to Practices to Benefits, written by Richard Merin. Richard is with us, as well as Ariel, who I saw on the conference call. And basically, this is a chapter that is very, I think it puts forward a difficult challenge for the field of ethics, because it invites us to scale up what we do to make it accessible and impactful for the many. So I'm speaking for people in the academia used to doing smaller scale things and being perhaps shy of thinking about how our ideas can have broader impact, because maybe we're not so used to that being the case. And based on his experience in management, governance, and business, Richard shares ideas for strategies on how we can move from smaller scale experimentations and what has been done, for example, here in Montreal in living ethics labs, to scale them up to have potentially mass impact and make changes in many different environments. But this requires maybe other sets of skills which we're less familiar with, such as leadership, obtaining institutional support from people leading institutions such as hospitals or academic institutions or community institutions, as well as maybe borrowing from strategies from fields like management and governance studies and so on, so that we can actually make impactful changes on healthcare systems and other organizations and even businesses. So in this sense, one of the main ideas of this chapter is that living ethics must become something that is more operational and widely accessible. And I think this is a very interesting challenge for us to think about. Now, Giulia cleverly pulled together 3 common points. So I wasn't able to come up with 3, but maybe I have 2 to share. I think these 4 chapters push us outside our comfort zones. They get us thinking outside the box about research ethics or, the international aspects of ethics, or about politics or business and governance. That's mostly, I think, outside of most everyone's comfort zone. We're not used to thinking about these things, I think. And then I think the second point they have in common is that to really tackle these barriers or move beyond these kind of comfort zones, we need new expertise and new collaboration. So we need to work with researchers, for example, to invite them to think about what research ethics is. We need to be humble about international standards in research ethics and really start taking seriously different life models and different values, rooted in different cultures. So we need to collaborate. Again, we need to maybe think very differently about how ethics is situated in broader political environments. That our role is actually much more political than we think. If we genuinely want to create creative, imaginative dialogue and spaces, that's not something that is going or seems to be, it's going against the grain, I think, of what's going on in the world today. So that means maybe we need to have an active role and be more actively political than, or more politically active than what we have considered. And then the last chapter also requires of us to think about collaborating with people who have expertise in scaling up ideas, people who are effective in bringing about institutional changes, for example. So I hope I have done also a good job selling my part of the book to you, because I think they are very inspiring contributions from esteemed colleagues. And I hope that together this book serves as an invitation to broaden how we think about ethics, with ultimately the goal of making it more accessible and more impactful in bringing about something like human flourishing.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you to all three panelists, Gabriel, Giulia, and Eric, for providing a very compelling overview of each section of the book. As Eric mentioned, there are about 17 chapters and a conclusion, so it is dynamic, it is rich. Any one chapter, I think, will give a lot to think about. I also want to speak a little bit more about the book and how it came together. The book was truly a collaborative effort involving scholars and practitioners in diverse areas of ethics research and practice from several continents: Australia, Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, South America. This means that the proposals for book chapters, the dialogue about developing book chapters, and the writing process itself was greatly influenced and enriched by our different perspectives, experiences, and stances towards ethics, and what we each of us and collaboratively saw for the possibilities for living ethics. And so I think that there's pieces in the book that, everybody can relate, that individuals can relate to, from the diverse areas in which you may be situated, whether it's research ethics in Asia, or clinical ethics in Africa. There is something in the book that deeply resonates, because it is very concerned with the human flourishing, with ethics as a part of life, and with contemplating deeply and collaboratively what it means to embody an ethics in the way we reflect and engage with one another, and strive to make impacts on the world. And so it's extremely relatable to many. Um, I definitely want to open up the floor to questions and dialogue, but I'd like to begin maybe with a catalyst question to our panelists. How did your experience with living ethics in theory and practice with the book, how did that impact, how did your experiences with writing the book or editing the book, planning for the book, impact how you think about enacting living ethics in your own work? And feel free to jump in whenever you feel inspired to respond.
I can take a shot at it. I think maybe I think the biggest change it's had is mostly on the way that I think about ethics more broadly, which is to me anchored in some of the key aspects of living ethics, in the sense that my my introduction to philosophical ethics was very much during my BA centered on, the canonical text of consequentialism and deontologism, which the details don't matter, but they share this kind of rationalistic strand. And since then, I've really moved towards recognizing the importance of meaning and values, and how they mostly actually shape the way that we behave in the world, and how they motivate us. And I think living ethics, by insisting on these aspects, has really, pushed me towards that direction. And now I'm a full-blown hermeneutist, we could say. So yeah, I guess that's one of the ways it's shaped me until now.
Wonderful. You've been converted, Gabriel. The book has
There we
achieved
go.
its mission.
I can go. Welcome amongst us, Gabriel. Hermeneutic ethicist, I mean. So maybe what I can share is just the experience of it. And so what I found very inspiring was to see that many colleagues from many different contexts had embodied the spirit of living ethics by practicing it and by embracing its living nature. And what I mean by living nature, I mean by realizing that there's no one size that fits all within this approach. And so it was so truly inspiring to me to see that they really embodied this self-reflective approach. And self-reflexivity is important in research, period, in all types of research. But that the editing of this book and reading of the chapters really showed me how this is not just a nice thing to do to enhance the quality of research, but it's the thing to do living ethics, to make ethics live in a way. So embracing doubts, valuing the voices, questioning presuppositions are practices that are fundamental to make ethics live. So I don't know if it changed the way I worked, but it inspired me a lot in seeing how diversity of practices that are brought to life by these chapters share very sharp familiarity. So they have resemblance among and across them. But it was also very interesting to see, and it was interesting and as a confirmation to me that yes, it is possible to respond of the needs of the context, so to be really embedded in a context, by still remaining faithful to living ethics stances. So this constant dialogue between these two things that is embodied by, I think, practicing self-reflexivity among other as say attitudes or ways of doing research. I don't know if this answers the question.
It's a wonderful insight. Thank you for sharing your experience, Giulia.
And maybe if I can jump in, I think just like Giulia and Gabriel, I think I take away, being more interested in, or like increasingly interested in issues of meaning and how people relate to things. And, this is definitely something I take away. And the diversity, like Giulia mentioned, was something extremely enriching, in the collaborative spirit and the process of doing this edited volume somewhat differently. It wasn't my first enterprise, but it's probably the project that I have co-led, which was the most participatory in terms of, book editing. And, that certainly brought a lot of life and connection, not only procedurally, but substantially. But anyhow, just to go back to the question, living ethics starts with this kind of assumption that there is interconnection first. We often start with the idea that things are kind of separated, and I think living ethics recognizes that life is somehow is connection. Connection between different human beings and connection to the natural environment. And I don't know exactly, you know, how I think we can justify this this presupposition, but I think doing the book and this series of trying to understand how people connect to each other and what we can learn from each human being, providing a unique perspective on life, on the world, was highly, highly enriching. And it's convinced me even more that this stance or attitude or orientation, whatever we call it, is fruitful. Because assuming that each human being has something unique to bring and we can learn from is actually a potent kind of strategy or technology, a way of thinking to bring new ideas forward and to learn from others. And so I grow out of this book like being a more avid co-learner, you know, an ethics co-learner of wanting to learn from others about how they see life and meaning in life. And this translates methodologically and, you know, practically in different projects in different ways. But I think increasingly moving forward, I want to create spaces where people are going to have this wonderful opportunity when we have it to learn from each other and change the mindset from, you know, seeing things as imposition of like power over each other to situations where we can learn from each other, you know, changing the dynamic from, you know, trying to dominate each other to actually learn from each other. And I want to do increasingly projects where people move to this kind of philosophy of co-learning in the realm of ethics and beyond. And just editing and learning about how people relate this idea of living ethics to different perspectives was for me proof in the pudding. You know, really like that, you know, this is a worthwhile idea and it's panning out, it's fruitful, and it's delivering. And I want to keep going and doing things that are aligned with this kind of commitment to interconnection and co-learning.
Excellent, Eric. Thank you. This very motivating, insightful comments from all of you. I'm very excited to proceed in that spirit of co-learning and dialogue by opening up the floor to our participants. If you have any questions or sharings that you might want to place in the chat box or unmute your mic, feel free to come onto video if you're comfortable. We would love to hear from you. Okay, I believe that Caroline has a hand up. Caroline, feel free to unmute your microphone or to chat in the chat box. Okay, while we're waiting on...
Est-ce que c'est possible de donner accès à Caroline pour le micro? We'll see if we can manage to open the mic.
Okay, perhaps while we're waiting for the IT logistics to work out, if anybody else from the attendants, any other participants would like to raise a question or comment, please feel free to do so. Well, I'm curious about any potential challenges that were experienced in producing the book, in the writing process and the editing process. What were some things that, from your experience were difficult maybe to navigate, and what was difficult about it? How did you find a way around it or forward or through it?
May I jump in? I think what, I- as Eric already mentioned, it was a truly collaborative process. So I actually felt during the process that there was a lot of commitment by all the authors and by all the editors. Everybody believed in the project, I felt. And therefore, although of course it required a lot of work from everybody, authors, editors, I didn't feel that we had that we encounter unsurmountable difficulties, so to speak, because there was so much enthusiasm in it that in the end we managed collaboratively to actually push through also the difficulties in a way that was quite smooth. That was my experience, but I don't know if you had the same experience.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Want to share? I think we now have questions in the Q&A, and we have issues with the mic, opening up access to the mic, but some have written down questions. Gabriel, did you want to go before we take maybe a question from the audience?
I can, but I kind of feel like I want to give the opportunity to respond to the questions in the chat if we
So Manisha, can you access the Q&A? Ariel has
Yes.
a question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Richard?
Can you hear me?
Oui, Richard, on peut.
No.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, congrats on publishing of the book and also on this launch. I think this is a meaningful step into deploying all the concepts. Sorry, my voice, I don't have my full voice today. Eric, I just want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity and the way you summarized the chapter 18 that I wrote about benefits and eventually, deploying. And I think that if we can start very, very small, we can build on those small wins eventually. So what I wish is that eventually people start small things and that we share them as a community in order to learn. You said co-learning was important. So I think that these deployment initiatives have to be shared so that everyone can learn about it and draw conclusion about what works best or not, depending on the circumstances. But and you know what, you said you wanted to be a good learner, and I think that by inviting people from the different sphere, this demonstrate curiosity, and curiosity will help us grow and come up with new ideas. So this is what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Richard. A couple of questions in the Q&A, going in order. One from Ariel Casco. What has been the impact you have seen from the book so far in terms of, for example, citations, library purchases, reviews, or other evidence of people reading and using it?
It's a great question. I haven't looked up the citations for the book or the sales. The book has been out for a few months now, so maybe there's been action on that front. What is perhaps easier to name, I think, are how people who have collaborated in writing the book seem to be taking ownership over this idea of finding inspiration in what we have done together. And to me, that's already very interesting. I'm not sure I've seen this before, where people like engaging in collaborative thinking like this sort of are inspired to take on next steps, including, for example, what Ariel's doing with ethics hangouts, for example, in different academic institutions in the US and others. So that's perhaps, we don't have so much information on citations or purchases or reviews, but what I'm seeing is some kind of like direct, concrete inspiration and impact of these ideas. And maybe that's the ultimate that we actually desire is moving in that sense. And eventually perhaps people will cite this work and related work and things will gain momentum because obviously we wanted to do an edited volume to bring more people on board and invite people to contribute and participate and collaborate. So for now, that's the information I have, but now I'm very curious to know about sales and citations.
Thank you, Eric. It's wonderful to see application expressed in so many ways. I'm sure there are citations. I know that a couple of chapters that I've worked on have been cited twice at least, and I'm confident that there are more, but perhaps a more meaningful impact is seeing its use. Caroline, you have your hand raised again, and I hope the audio is able to work for you this time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yay.
Hello from northern Saskatchewan, everyone. And
Hi,
and
Caroline.
I'm not sitting in a snowbank, which is really a good thing. I was last week, but we finally have spring has arrived. And so congratulations, first of all, on the book. And so nice to see you on the screen, all of you. And so I have a question. This is so I love the work that you're doing, and so I want to come at it from the angle of how do we apply living ethics in a context where we have these interactions between individuals in healthcare and in research, for instance. But we have examples in Canada of whistleblowers, right? So Nancy. I'll say her name wrong, Olivier Vervi, who was at the University of Toronto, I believe, and there was a pharmaceutical clinical trial of which she raised a red flag and became a whistleblower. And then lots of things happened to her that really impacted negatively her career. And so in the context of living ethics, so to me, this is a clear example of something that's happening to real people, right? This person is seeing something that she doesn't feel is correct. But then you have pharmaceuticals, which are corporations, right? So their bottom line, and they're actually just like a person legally, right? They have rights and they have legal protection. And so in that context, how can we think, or should we be thinking about living ethics in relation to the sleight of hand that happens to this individual who's up against either the university? So I would argue in her case that there was a significant institutional betrayal that she felt as someone who's working really hard, who's trying to be very ethical in what she's seen and what she's reporting, but yet you have this entity which is large, which is the university, the pharmaceutical, and then other researchers who weren't supporting her. And there was as if you remember the case, the poison pen letters, that came from a very, very well-known researcher, Gideon Coran, that came out about what he was doing in terms of attacking this researcher. So this to me is an example, and on a smaller scale, I think it happens a lot where you've got individuals who have a choice to make, that you can be ethical and moral and stand up, but having that moral courage to stand up in a context when you're up against institutions and corporations for profit that are big and confusing and have their own identity, even though they're run by people. And so how do you, as a panel, in relation to the work that you've done on this book, how do we think about those circumstances? Because at the very heart of ethical research and ethical clinical practice are exactly, like, if we don't do well in these examples, right? Like, if we don't do the best that we can do, and I don't believe in her case that happened by either the hospital and by the pharmaceutical company, then we have no basis in some ways, right? So there were vulnerable people. She was vulnerable, and I don't think we had enough dialogue and discussion about that particular case, but other cases like that.
Maybe I can say a word. Maybe I'm more familiar with the case, which I kind of forgot some of the details about, but is something that happened when I was perhaps a graduate student or early in my career. This was a major case of conflict of interest, and that challenged the integrity of a committed researcher who whistleblew about a situation that was problematic, and she was not supported by her institution. So to me, I mean, I don't have a ready-made answer, but I think what living ethics points to, I think, is the importance of the alignment of not only individual moral courage, but having institutions that are also committed, deeply committed to freedom, including academic freedom and integrity. I think living ethics is a stance that makes the point that, about the importance of coherence in one's life between our words and our actions and our values and our practices, and that our identity as human beings is fundamentally shaped by our values. And therefore, integrity, ethical, moral integrity, is usually important to who we are. And in the end, this is the case of a researcher who stood up for what she was committed to. She deserves our praise and recognition for having done this for all of us, basically standing up for the integrity of knowledge and of research. And maybe the reverse for her institution, which did not support her. In the end, to me, this is a situation that makes the case for the importance of, or the importance of the cultures, the work cultures in which we are. That, they're powerful, and they're sometimes not working, in the favor of academic freedom and integrity. And that we need to be more careful about, not only like individuals doing the good thing, but making sure that they are in places and contexts and spaces where they have some freedom to voice concerns. And in the end, we will all gain from commitments to truth, to integrity, and the good of others. And when we have and work in institutions that are not committed deeply to this, or don't provide protection for individuals, we will in the end all suffer. And for example, in our chapter, Arthur and I, really argue strongly about the importance of democracy for ethics, and it's something we're kind of losing track of, but, these broader commitments are not only words, and we're seeing the impact of this. And we are seeing the impact on ethics and its ability to foster dialogue and co-learning just south of the border here from Canada. We're seeing this hugely. So yes, it's a really interesting case and situation. And thanks,
Thank you,
Carol.
Eric. Yeah, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Caroline, for the rich question. In the interest of time, I think I might forward through some questions, just laying them out for further reflection. Anne Houdon asks, these chapters have been written months ago now. What have you learned in practicing ethics, living ethics in the weeks and months since that you would add to the book if it could be edited now? Amélie Provence asks, what are the higher expectations of the authors for this book? How can this book not only reach people already converted by ethics, but also have a wider impact in the socio-political field? While we unfortunately don't have time to address these questions, I would like to offer just 1 minute for final remarks from our panelists that may address these questions or final reflections on today's seminar.
Maybe a quick thought following one of the comments that Eric made in his resume of the last section on the relationship between ethics and politics. It seems to me that one of the important aspects of living ethics, if we want people to be committed and involved in it, is this idea that we are, to an extent, involved in a shared project for the future, like a shared vision for the future, which is both, ethical and political to my sense. And I think that, it's if we're capable of creating that shared vision and welcoming people inside of it, I think that this is where like the social power, the potential impacts of living ethics is going to be felt and realized through. So maybe an ambition for the volume is, one step toward that direction.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah, if I can add just very quickly, I think the hope for this book is that it gives inspiration to people, to all of us, to bring ethics outside of the scholarly debate. At the, in restaurants, in schools, in the public square, to make it something that is truly alive in daily conversations amongst citizens, really, and not just among scholars.
Thank you, Giulia. Eric.
Yeah, I think my own takeaway would be is that we're not done yet. We're just starting. There needs to be much more to be done. And maybe picking up on Richard's contribution to the book is we need to look, for example, at how people can make things approachable for others. I don't want to say that, there's a science of marketing, but I'm going to say it. And we can view, the science as being the science of being able to talk to other people, and make the value of certain ideas and practices known. And I think there's something we can learn from this and learn how we can speak to others in a way that triggers, this interest in the kinds of commitments we share and we want to push forward. And that, the learning spirit of living ethics, I think, is an interesting strategy, or Richard mentioned curiosity, an interesting way of trying to create space for ideas. And strangely enough, by kind of listening instead of speaking and being attuned to the needs of others, we can also, co-create these ideas or rejuvenate them and improve them through our dialogues with others. And so maybe that's a way to address the two questions from Anne and Emily at the same time. But we're not done yet. That's my conclusion.
We're not done yet. I love it. Great conclusion. Thank you, Eric. I would like to thank our panelists and audience for your sharing, engagement, and dialogue on the first edition of Living Ethics in Theory in Practice, which is available via Routledge. I would also like to extend my gratitude and appreciation to our supporters and affiliations. The 2026-2027 series is welcoming proposals that resonate with living ethics. These may be proposals that highlight an innovative, collaborative, or dynamic project that you want to share. Please download the form directly on our website or scan the QR code. And finally, we would be pleased to connect with you, pleased to co-learn, to discover, explore, reach out via email to living.ethics@ircm.qc.ca or by scanning the QR codes on the screen to find more information about the Living Ethics International Network and our online seminar series. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Manisha.
Thank you all.
Thank you.